Hey, it's a gorgeous day out today. I'm really happy to be outside. I'm going to help Irene move some compost that I picked up several days ago from the car to the beds where we're going to put it out. Irene already has most of it out of the car and on the cart, so I'm going to see if I can move the cart. Hey, by the way, you're watching BrainStormAcres and I'm Henry. You haven't seen much of me for the past, probably 6 or 8 weeks because I've had a big issue going on with my leg. Not all that dangerous, I don't think, but it's been pretty darn painful. Well, time to get at it. Rufus is really interested in this compost. It's mushroom compost, so it doesn't have any manure in it or anything like that, but it's definitely a new smell for him. Well, maybe not all that new, but new this year. Shall we get moving, dude? You still want to smell? Are you done snuffling everything? I think he's done.
Rufus says, "Oh, I got to go somewhere. Mom's got to leash."
You gonna go down to the studio?
Yeah. I forgot my container out. He startled me when he came flying in the door. I forgot my container of stuff.
What are you gonna go work on?
Well, let's see. I've got a couple of half molds. Well, I got one half mold that's pieces that need to be repaired. So I'll cast wax in there and then I'll repair the waxes. And then I've got some pieces that can be directly cast. A couple pieces in here can be directly cast in an investor church, you know.
So you're going to be making stage 2 originals, and then you're going to be making molds of things that are ready to cast.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Combination of things. So.
Have fun.
Yeah. Come on, Wolfus. Let's go.
I'm going to get the rest of this compost over by the beds.
Okay. Did you see the mouse?
I did not. I'll go take a look.
You should take a look. He just expired, I think. I don't think they have a real long life.
Well, you saw Irene out pruning our blackberries. Plants are looking great. Now, we decided to prune these blackberries differently than what many people would do. When I was a kid, I'd run a mower through our blackberry, well, actually our raspberry patch, to kind of give us new ways of getting in and to encourage new growth. Of course, when we cut everything down, that meant that we didn't have any fruit from those canes that came up that year, but the next year was pretty bonus. And we had some snow yesterday. And there's very little damage on these plants. They're looking fabulous. Raspberries are looking fabulous. You can see new growth growing on all these canes. All the leaves coming out. So these canes should all have new fruits this year. Hopefully they're going to do a really good job for us. If not this year, then next year should be even better. There's new canes coming up here. These are sprouting up from the sets we put in the ground last year. And that's great because they're going to be next year's fruiting crop. I'm expecting this bed to get very full over the next couple of years.
Hey everybody, it's Irene, and obviously I'm in the studio. Now, this is a part of the studio you don't see me work in very often. You've seen me work at the wax bench before, but I don't think you've ever seen me use the vulcanizer. Now, when you're making molds, and that's what these white things are, some types of silicone mold making material require cooking And that's what a vulcanizer does. It cooks. And this one is already set up for this particular stuff. And I made 2 molds this morning. And my goal is to make another 2 this afternoon. Because I'm trying to catch up on some of the projects. And here's a mold frame. They come in different styles and different shapes. Probably the most common version is something like this, single one. But this one will make 2 molds, which is handy dandy. I also have some that are, you notice that this is a 1/2 inch, this is 3/4 inch thick, this is an inch thick, and it's also bigger. And I also have some here that have holes in them. Those are technically meant for use with organic rubber, but they can be used for the silicone as long as you don't mix molds or if you clean them in between time. You simply have to cover up the holes because the rubber, organic rubber, needs to expand more than this does, and therefore it needs someplace to go. So when I do the silicone in here, I just cover those holes up with, because it has holes on each side. I cover those up with a little piece of metal. I have metal. So, what I'm going to do today is, I have the 2 molds that I made this morning. Well, my goal is to choose the stuff I'm going to use for this afternoon. And what I'm doing right now is I'm using actual artifacts that are in good enough shape that I will not have to do any great amount of cleanup on them. So I brought down some stuff this morning, and I have to decide which one of these things I'm going to play with. Some of these things are already things that I've been working on with other stuff this morning. Tried to cast this one before. Doesn't cast well, but I really want the piece, so I'm going to have to modify that in some way. Well, I'm going to decide which one of these things I'm going to work on. Actually, which 2. And then I will set this up so that you can see what I'm doing. Because I'm going to be using this stuff, which is called Nisem. It's a silicone mold making material. This one, Nisem, is made by a company in Italy. Very reputable, very reliable. And yeah, so I'll bring you guys back when I'm set up down here so that you can see what I'm doing. The first thing I'm going to do before I do that is I'm going to turn this on, because it does take a little while to heat up. Here we go. And what I just screwed this down on is a thermometer. Yield thermometer. And this is what has to go under this when I'm working on it. So, I'll be back. Okay, here we are, getting ready to get going. Now, you'll notice I've just sort of tossed some stuff here. This is my back plate. This is my mold frame. I've chosen 2 pieces. I've chosen 2 pieces which are actual artifacts. I actually bought these quite a while ago. But they are accessible to people on places like eBay and stuff like that. Through experimentation and investigation, I was able to come up with a couple of different companies that seemed fairly honest. And my preference was to buy old stuff rather than stuff that's new or stuff that is from certain places in Europe. Eastern Europe is particularly famous for fakes, and these things are mostly not from Eastern Europe. They're from England. And they're old metal detecting collections and surface finds. People run around and find things. And if you found this stuff early enough, before the Treasure Act went into effect, you're not obligated to do anything with it. Some people still did, but none of these things are what I call treasures. These are all common items that would have been, you know, the museums have already got 3,000 of them. They don't need 3,001. So I'm not in any way making a mess of the archaeological record. Okay, what I have here is 2 buckles, 2 different styles of buckles. This one is like that. And this one is obviously has one-sided, so it's that's the end of it. This is the part that would have gone towards the belt, and there would have probably this would have had a tongue on it. This is not one of the buckles that has a center metal piece to it. I'll have to show you one of those sometime. Anyway, so this would just have a tongue on it, and then the belt itself would have been attached right here. But what I need to do is set this up to be able to create new molds. So I've got my cooker over there, which is called a vulcanizer, and I'm going to push this stuff over to the side a little bit temporarily while I cut some of the mold rubber. Now, this is not exactly what I'd call brain surgery. It is simply knowing that these holes here are 1 7/8 inches in one direction and 2 7/8 in the other direction. So if I cut a strip in this direction, and what I'll do is I'll mark it actually. This is simple measuring. No brain surgery necessary. And I try and be pretty precise. There is a certain amount of fudge factor involved in this, in the sense that this material is plastic. It bends, it squishes, and that's good because it means that it will bend and squish and give us some space. Now, it also does not like it when you write on it, try and write on this plastic with magic marker. Let's try that again. It doesn't usually work that badly, but it did this time, of course. There we go. That's a little better. Doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of times I just cut it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to cut 2 sections because as I nibble this down, this sheet starts out to be about that big. Eventually, when you start out, you'll have like, oh, well, I could get 8 of these out of that or whatever. Yeah. And then as you cut it down, you're like, oh, I can't do that anymore. So there we go. All I have to do, I can cut it with anything I want to. In this case, I'm just going to use an X-Acto knife. I'm trying to be relatively precise. It's not like cutting metal in the sense that this is an easy cut and it squishes. So if I have a little tiny gap somewhere, I can squish some of the stuff in there. I can even add more material. I have a little pile of scraps. So sometimes if you don't cut it all the way through, it's like cutting a piece of wallboard. You just have to go back and cut that. There's plastic on both sides of this to keep it clean. You don't want it to get super dirty because it may not adhere to itself properly otherwise. My hands are clean. And I save things like this and stick them in the little pile of stuff here. So I need to verify that that's 2 7/8. I think it is. Yeah, 2 7/8. I thought so, but in a minute you question yourself, it's better to go back and measure it again rather than screwing it up. So this is how I usually do it. I usually just cut it. As I said, there's a squishable factor to this. So if it's off by a little bit, it's not a big deal. I screwed up one completely the other day. I don't know what I did. I must have cut on the wrong line. But the result was I had a short one. And I'm like, I can fix that. All I had to do was cut a shred out of my spare stuff and fix it right up, and the mold came out great. And that's the only thing that matters. Sometimes it will make the thing not as pretty, but what we're concerned about is functionality and longevity. So will it work when you first start with it, and how long will it continue to work? So I'm going to cut these back plastic. And you'll notice I do have a little section that's left over that goes in my collection of stuff. I'm going to get these all set up. I know from experience that this particular mold frame requires 3 of these in order to function correctly. The reason I'm cutting from this end instead of this end is you'll notice this end is cockeyed. And while I'm not trying to be machinist precision here, I do want some. It's just easier if I don't have something that's totally lopsided. Rather to have a little bit extra than to have too little and have to piece it. So there we go. Now this has to be cooked at a specific temperature. This particular compound is like 194 degrees that you have to cook it at, and it needs to be cooked 19 minutes for every 1/4 inch. And they don't want you to get hotter than, a lot hotter than that, and they don't want you to overcook it, otherwise you'll lose your flexibility. So I've got it. I've experimented. I've got it working correctly with the vulcanizer. I know exactly what temperature to set it to. It's preset. And there we go. So, back plate. Now, what I'm going to do is something that I wish somebody had taught me to do a long time ago, which is mark on this stuff. Once your mold is made, and this is a different kind of silicone, but looks like that. If you write on the outside of it, it will wipe off. I don't care if you're using some sort of really cool Sharpie or whatever you're using, it will wipe off. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to peel off half of this, and I'm going to draw a crude decoration here that indicates the shape, and it's a buckle. Now, when this is done cooking, that will be permanently cooked into the outside layer. So I'm going to put this face down in here. You'll notice I'm trying not to touch it ever any place except on the edges. Now, if I was going to be super picky, I could decide to trim off these corners. They used to sell, and they probably still do sell, some types of molding rubber that are shaped exactly like these things, rounded corners and all. The stuff that I used to buy is no longer available. So I contacted Rio Grande Jewelry Supply, and said, okay, the stuff I used to use is not available anymore. This is what it used to be. What do I switch to? And the person I was talking with is very knowledgeable about such things and told me what he likes to use and thought that it would work great, and it has worked really well. I'm very pleased with it. Okay, now that's smooshed down in there pretty well. Now, my next layer is going to actually have this pressed into the front of it face down. And it's also going to have a sprue creator. So this is going to create, this little cone here is going to create the location that the wax or metal, depending on what you're pouring, is poured into. And this there is the sprue. So it's going to set just like this. But because I want this to mold correctly, I'm going to cut out a little triangle there. Sometimes I don't do this. It creates a much lumpier mold when you don't do it. And you wind up with more waste. So the last couple of molds I've made, I have done this. And it does seem to make it a little less wasteful. This stuff I'm cutting out simply goes into my reuse this when you need a little piece pile. Now, next thing I have to do is get this plastic off. Because if I leave the plastic there, it's not going to mold the sections of silicone together correctly. It won't melt them. They need contact on each other. So there's that. I need to take off the plastic on here. Now, you'll notice when I set this in, I'm going to go from one end to the other. The reason I'm doing that is I want to avoid bubbles getting into the sandwich that I'm making, because that's what it's like, a sandwich. Now, generally speaking, I don't have problems, but it's not a bad plan to be just a little careful. I'm not totally tweaking out and, you know, going crazy about it and everything like that, but you'll see me push it down a couple times. If I'm having trouble getting stuff to fit in correctly, I'll smash things. And you'll see me smush it really thoroughly. Once in a while, I will decide to pound on something because I'm not comfortable with the way it's going together. But there we go. Now, those two pieces are in there tight with one another. Extra mold making compound is going to squish out just like this, see? So that extra stuff there. The actual mold ends right here. And I'll trim that off when I'm done. See, it doesn't... This magic marker is not writing all that great today, but that says debuckle. If you don't know, if you don't have something like that written on the outside, then the way you find out what that is you open it up. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal for something like this, because this is a really unique one. But when you have a stack of 50 of these things, it's much nicer to be able to read the information on the outside than it is to have to go through each and everything. Okay, so this one is the one that's being put in here. So I'm putting the... I'm not happy completely with the way this slid. So, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a little bit of a gap here. It shouldn't have happened that way. So I'm going to fix that gap by inserting a little bit of spare stuff. Here's some spare stuff. I can cut this really thin, and I could just slide it in there. Okay. Make sure there's no plastic on there. And I'm just going to slide that right in there because I don't want any gaps. Chances are very good that it would actually expand enough that the gap would be gone, but I don't want to risk that. I also plugged the top of that little triangle. Now, there's still a lot of empty space in there, so when I smash this in, it's going to go in really easily. I'm going to push on here because I want it to go down inside completely like that. You do have to be careful. I'm obviously pushing with the butt end of a knife. I'm going to take this face down because I want to make sure that the face of the buckle is thoroughly mashed into there. Now, this happens to be a very sturdy buckle, so I can be pretty forceful in terms of pushing on it. If it were something fragile, I would be using a different technique. I would probably be using a different molding compound, probably one of the putty molding compounds, so that I wouldn't have to smush on it at all. And there is some danger in this. I could crack it. Not something I want to do, but that seems to have gone fine. So now I need another one of these. Peel off the plastic. Stick it down. This time I'm going to make sure. I thought I had it. Sometimes if you round off the corners a little bit, it goes in better. I thought I had it far enough down. I obviously didn't. I was too busy talking. Can't imagine how that could have happened. And I'm going to, again, start from one end and push to the other. Get the plastic off. And this again will be ready. I'm going to right buckle on here. Someone just honked the horn. That's weird. Okay. It looks like it ruckled because it didn't right at the bottom of the B. There we go. Ruckle. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just to give me a clue. Some of the compounds write on easier than others. And some people also insert other things, but I don't pretend to have the magic touch for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat that process exactly over here with this one. And then when I'm all done, I'll bring you back and we'll stick it in the vulcanizer and I'll show you how I cut the ones that are already done.